decided that he needed to get help quickly, and he dispatched a couple of people. One was Diego de Arana, who was listed as the marshal of the boat, and Pedro Gutierrez, who was the butler of the royal household, to get Guacanagari, el cacique de Marian, which was the casicasco that they were in order to get help. And they needed help desperately. The indigenous people came running. They helped him. They helped to empty the Santa Maria of all of her cargo. Columbus wrote that he was crying by this time. Should we believe him? I don't know. But I can imagine that it was a very stressful situation. But I can imagine that for the indigenous boys that were on his boat, it was even scarier. They had nobody there. They weren't family in between them. They didn't even know each other. Supposedly, Guacanagari was such a wonderful person towards Colon. He even sent some of his own family members to make sure that Colon was okay. He supposedly even told them that he would give him whatever he needed for his trip back home. On December 26th, Colon had now taken over La Nina, and the two leaders, both Colon and Guacanagari, they actually ate on board of La Nina. Later, for the first time, Colon actually got off of his ship and went ashore and stepped onto La Española. Carnes y casabe. He even describes cleaning his hands on the herbs just like his host did. Now we could just imagine that these boys were maybe familiar with the food. I would assume that it was similar. But again, they were probably extremely homesick by now. You can just imagine how the young Taino boys felt as they tried to translate what Guacanagari wanted to say to Colon. I also think that during this time is when one particular boy among these boys became very close to Colon. In the second episode, we'll learn a little bit more about this particular boy. It says they were all naked, except for Guanacanari, who decided that out of respect for his guests, that he now wore a shirt and gloves that the admiral had given him, the admiral being Colon, and over the gloves he made more rejoicing than anything. With the help of these boys, they supposedly talked strategic matters, and they also talked about their enemies, the Caribs. Colon wanted to reassure his new ally, so he told him, "No worries, we will destroy the Caribs." To demonstrate their strength, Colon commanded for 2 shots to be fired in the clear, silent Caribbean night. By December 31st, Colon was ready to return to Spain. But of course, he wasn't going to go alone. He was going to bring 10 indigenous boys as gifts to the queen. He didn't actually leave until January 2nd, 1493. The boys were on board the ship, very cramped because they weren't on the Santa Maria, remember? They were on La Nina. La Nina was a lot smaller than the Santa Maria. But since Colon had left 39 of his men, the accommodations were acceptable. But by January 13th, the Nina had still not caught a good enough wind to send her off. They were just edging along the coast of La Española. And so Colon sent some sailors to go on shore and get some more food and water. But instead, they found a group of men, indigenous men, with bows and arrows. One of them, who now is believed to have been the Ciguayo warrior Mayo Banex, came face to face with Colon, and Colon felt really nervous because this indigenous person was different. His face was stained with this black liquid. He wrote, "He wore his hair very long and drawn together and fastened behind, and gathered into a little nest of parrot feathers, and he was naked as the others." They were now in the region of Samaná, which is where the great Ciguayo warriors lived. With his young guide, he asked this warrior if there was any gold. The child let him know that here gold was tuab, not caona like in the other place. The indigenous man let him know that, oh yeah, there was more gold, but in Borique. He thanked this Taino, and he assumed it was a Taino because he wasn't in Carib territory. He rewarded him for the information that he gave, and he gave him pieces of red and green cloth and some little beads of glass. He then, through boys, let him know, hey, can you come back with some more gold? But as they got close to the shore to return this menacing Taino, he noticed that they were no less, as he wrote, no less than 55 men with very long hair as the women wear it in Castile. Each one was carrying a bow and arrow. The Taino that was on board told the ones that were getting ready to shoot him to put their weapons down. So then Colon's men tried to convince them to sell their arrows to them, and they were trying to exchange it for the items that they had offered to them. But then the mood turned hostile all of a sudden. The Indians became very angry. You can imagine the young boys sensing the tension, and they're just there in the middle of it. All of a sudden, Colon himself, he decided to attack first. He supposedly slashed one of them right in the buttocks, and then another one was wounded in the chest by an arrow. Apparently, seeing their wounded comrades, the rest of the Tainos fled. And the main reason this happened was that Colon realized that the indigenous people carried apparently types of ropes that they were going to bind them with. And this he couldn't just allow. From this first battle of the Americas, he captured 4 young men. He already carried 2 young sons of Guacanagari that had been given to him to carry to Spain. But by January 18th, the ship stalled again. So the young boys decided to go for a swim. They were carefully watched by their Spanish captors.